Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Anka. I'm a registered dietitian. I work for a practice called Sound Dietitians, where I work with a lot of patients, but I also get to do fun classes like these. And before we get started, I just wanted to shout out a thank you to Skagit Regional Health for sponsoring this event and Stilly Valley Health Connections for hosting. Thank you to Christina in the back for taking care of all the online things. For those of you at home, if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat. And then Christina, feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions. For those of you in person, feel free to shout out questions and comments as we go. So tonight we are going to be talking about sheet pan dinners. This is one of my favorite topics because it's really easy to just throw something on a sheet pan, make it really tasty, flavorful, and also very nutritious. So we have 3 different sheet pan dinners today that we're going to be working through. And then I also have 2 sauces that I'm going to demonstrate just to accompany the dishes. Also, I didn't want you guys to just stare blankly at me while we waited for things to bake in the oven. So that's kind of the role of the sauces as well. So we're going to start with a smoky sweet potato and chickpea sheet pan dinner. So I already have my sweet potato and my cauliflower cut up. I did some of the prep beforehand just so we have enough time for these things to go in the oven. So I'm also going to cut half of a red onion. So the other half we're going to be using for our sheet pan cashew tofu dish. So my red onion, I typically like to just cut it into sections and then do squares, especially in the oven. I find like this type of cut helps the onion kind of stay more whole and it doesn't just melt away in the pan. But you're also welcome to cut it however you would like. I wouldn't recommend for something like this because it is going to be sitting in the oven for 30 to 35 minutes. I wouldn't recommend a really small dice just because, again, those onions are going to cook really well and they're going to be really, really soft, almost jammy. And we want a little bit of texture with sheet pan dinners. So I'm just separating the layers here so that there's an even cook amongst these. So with this recipe, I was kind of limited in terms of size for both my cauliflower and my sweet potatoes. So my only options were large pieces of sweet potatoes and cauliflower. So we're going to do 2 sheets for these for this specific recipe. So I have my sweet potatoes, cauliflower on one sheet, and then my onions and chickpeas are going to go on a separate pan as well. And if you had a really large sheet pan, you could possibly just put everything on one sheet pan. Okay, so I have my chickpeas. So these are just canned chickpeas. They're low sodium. So whenever we're using canned beans, I always recommend using a low sodium or a no salt added version. And the reason for that is with a lot of canned products, they do add quite a bit of salt that you really just don't need. And you can add afterwards if you feel like you need it to be a little saltier. But typically it's pretty significant amount of salt that they add to canned products that just is not necessary. When we're talking about salt, the recommendation is keeping it below 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. That's kind of the general recommendation. And sometimes with canned products, you can have up to like 500 milligrams of sodium, in a serving. So that can be quite significant in cutting, taking away from that total amount, right? So the next thing we're going to do is make our seasoning blend. So I have a bunch of different spices here. We're going to start with smoked paprika. And the nice thing about this spice blend is Everything uses just 1 teaspoon, right? One variation. You don't have to juggle through the different measuring spoons. So I have my smoked paprika. I have my fennel seeds here. You could also use ground fennel as well. I feel like the whole fennel also gives it a nice texture, a bite to it as well. I have some dried basil here. Some thyme, dried thyme. You could also use fresh as well. I have some ground cumin. And also some garlic powder.
She says 2 teaspoons of paprika.
Yes, I did do 2 teaspoons of paprika. So that was the only one that had double. Everything else is just 1 teaspoon. Again, you could very well just eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You could also do whatever seasonings you want. I would say, you know, to keep up with the smoky theme, the smoked paprika would be a good option. You could also add some cayenne pepper or red pepper flakes to this to make it spicy as well. So that could be a good option. And then I'm just going to add some black pepper to this. Again, I'm kind of just eyeballing. The salt and the black pepper are really to taste. I don't want to make this too salty, so I'm just going to do a heavy pinch. And then for this seasoning blend, because we have the whole fennel seeds, I like to mix it by hand to kind of rub those fennel seeds together. That helps to release the essential oils, so you get a more flavorful product. And also, you know, it saves having to wash a utensil, right? That's another thing that I really love about sheet pan dinners is it helps to cut down on the amount of equipment you're using and also dishes, which is really nice. So we're just going to do a drizzle of olive oil on our sweet potatoes, our cauliflower, and same thing with our chickpeas, our onions. I'm just going to do half and half on each of these pans in terms of the seasoning blend, because these are quite a lot of veggies. I might do a little bit more on this pan just because there is a larger volume of the sweet potato and the cauliflower. And then with the chickpeas, we want these guys to get nice and crispy. Okay. So I'm just gonna mix this by hand. So these can all be mixed together. It doesn't necessarily have to stay separate on one part of the sheet pan. I have a runaway garbanzo bean. I'm just gonna save. Same thing with these guys over here. It's gonna give it a nice mix so that everything is coated evenly. And we're also, once these are done cooking, we'll mix everything together as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna rinse my hands real quick. Okay, and we're just gonna throw these in the oven. So these are gonna go in for 30 minutes. We'll check them, see how they're doing, and then see if we need to do another 5 to 10 minutes. And it might be that this pan with the onions and the chickpeas might be done before the cauliflower and the sweet potato. And if that's the case, we'll just pull it out and let the other ones roast for a little bit longer. So let me do this one. Okay, that's working. All right. So next we are going to move on to our lemon garlic shrimp. So I will say for this recipe, you could do, instead of the shrimp, you could do chicken, you could do tofu, you could do the garbanzo beans as well. Those all work really well with this marinade. So for the marinade, we're gonna start with 1/4 cup of olive oil. I actually already have the garlic in here. So that's about a quarter cup. We're going to zest and juice 1 lemon. You could also, if you wanted to, you could absolutely use lime for this instead. So I'm just going to use a microplane. And this one is really sharp, which is part of the reason why I grated all of my garlic beforehand, so I wouldn't accidentally grate my fingers while I was talking to you. So the zest is going to have a lot of the essential oils that's going to give it that nice lemon flavor along with the juice. So we'll see about how much juice we're going to be able to pull out from these lemons. These guys are pretty thick in terms of the rind. So they're better for zesting and a little not as great for juicing. But again, you kind of have to work with what you can find at the grocery store, right? Okay, so that's good. Another trick to kind of get the most juice out of your lemon is to just massage it against a cutting board. So what that does is it kind of breaks up the cells inside the lemon itself that is holding the juice. So you're practically juicing it from the inside out, kind of. So I'm actually gonna cut the ends off just to make sure that it fits in my juicer. Okay, so not a whole lot of juice is coming out just because of how thick these guys are. So I do have an extra lemon that I'm just going to open up in juice as well. So with this marinade, once we mix it, we're going to add a couple of teaspoons to our potatoes over there. So those are baby potatoes that I just cut up before class. So you could cut them in halves. I chose quarters just to make sure that they cook in time. But we're gonna add a couple spoonfuls of this marinade to our potatoes, and then we're gonna let our shrimp kind of sit in it for a little while the potatoes bake. Okay, so I have my lemon. We're gonna do about a tablespoon of Dijon. So this is going to act as an emulsifier. So it's going to make the marinade nice and creamy. I already have my garlic cloves, and then I'm just gonna estimate, just using my palm, about a quarter teaspoon of salt, and then some black pepper as well. Okay, so we're gonna mix this until everything is nice and blended. Yeah, so you could, there's actually only one substitute that I know of. So it is a herb that is used in, I think it's a spice actually, not an herb, that is used in Indian cooking. It's called, I'm probably mispronouncing it, but asafoetida. And it mimics the taste of garlic and onions. So it is a really good substitute for getting that taste without using garlic or onions. Okay, so I'm just gonna add a couple of spoonfuls over my potatoes. Okay, and I'm just gonna toss these so that they are nice and coated with this marinade. So we're gonna let the shrimp sit in the marinade for a little bit. And then at the end, once we're ready to add the shrimp to our sheet pan and throw it in the oven, we're actually gonna drizzle the rest of the marinade onto our potatoes and also some zucchini so that we don't actually waste any of it. So with the potatoes, I actually like to turn them so that they have one side that's cut facing down so that it gets nice and crispy. Okay, so let me wash my hands again. All right, so these are gonna go in the oven for 15 minutes to get nice and brown. Let me just do it on my phone. Okay. And we're gonna do 15 minutes. Okay, so next I'm just gonna add my shrimp to, let me actually do it over here so I can use this cutting board. Shrimp, so these are clean, deveined, no shell on. You could do the tails on if you really wanted to. They didn't have a whole lot of options at the store. So I'm just gonna throw these guys in here and give it a nice toss. So these guys are just gonna hang out here on the counter with us for a little bit and just marinate, kind of blend with these flavors over here. And again, this, when I tested this recipe, I actually tested it with tofu and it worked really well with tofu as well. Okay, I'm just gonna leave this here. Or actually I'll move it over here so we have a little more room. All right. So next, we're gonna work on the sheet pan cashew tofu dish. So this is an Asian inspired dish. I already cut up some of the broccoli. So we're gonna have to make everything fit on here. I also cut up some of the stems of the broccoli. So I wanted to demonstrate how to cut the stem so that you waste as little of the broccoli as you can. So typically the stem has an outer shell, let's say, that's a little bit tougher, but if you use your knife to cut through it, there's actually a really soft core. So if you were to just press with your fingertip or your fingernail, it would go through. This outer part, not so much. So we need to get rid of it. And I like to cut it on all edges to reveal the soft, tender core. So you're wasting a little bit less of your broccoli, and this tastes just like broccoli. It's a little bit softer than just the florets. And this works a lot better with the larger stems too. So yeah. So we're gonna also cut up our other half of an onion. So I'm gonna do the exact same cut for this as well, just because it makes it a little bit easier. Again, I'm separating these layers. And you could also use a sweet onion if you wanted to. It doesn't necessarily have to be a red onion. You know, the red adds to the color aspect, right? We know that when food is more colorful, we tend to savor it a little bit better. It looks a little bit better, right? We eat with our eyes and our noses first. I would say like taste is probably the last sense that we use to eat. And then bell peppers, I'm gonna do kind of a similar cut as well. So kind of larger squares. Again, getting some texture. You could cut it smaller if you wanted to as well. I think with the bell peppers and the onions, especially since they don't take very long to cook, you don't necessarily need to cut it very small. Okay. So I'm just gonna add these guys to our sheet pan. There's gonna be a little bit of overlap with this, and that is a-okay. All right. Next, we're gonna make the sauce. So the sauce, we're gonna start, I already grated the garlic. We also have a green onion that I'm just going to chop really quickly. So this doesn't have to be too small. So with the sauce, we're going to drizzle some of this sauce onto our tofu before we cook it, before we throw it in the oven. And then afterwards, we're going to put the sauce in a saucepan cook it on the stove a little bit so that it thickens up. And then once this sheet comes out of the oven, we'll drizzle the rest of the sauce and kind of toss everything together. Oh, and before I forget, the cashews as well. So I'm just gonna sprinkle them. And these are more for, you know, getting some healthy fats, but also having that crunch texture as well. Okay, so we're gonna use some soy sauce. This is actually tamari, so gluten-free tamari at that. So this is gonna be gluten-free. And this one is 28% less sodium. You could also very easily just get full sodium soy sauce or tamari and just dilute it with water. That's what they do in processing too. So you're kind of just paying for extra water. Okay. Next, we're going to be using oyster sauce. So you could use hoisin sauce. That would make the sauce a little bit more sweet. With oyster sauce, it makes it a little bit savory. This is actually a vegan oyster sauce. So it's basically just a mushroom sauce that kind of mimics oyster sauce. I actually like it a little bit more than regular oyster sauce. So we're just going to do 1 tablespoon of this. About 1 tablespoon of rice vinegar. So that's going to give it a nice acidity to kind of cut through all the savoriness and the maple syrup that's going to add the sweetness as well. So we're doing 1 tablespoon of this guy. Also going to do 2 teaspoons of sesame oil in here. And then 1.5 tablespoons of maple syrup. Again, you could just eyeball this instead of just measuring everything out. That also works just fine. Okay, we got the garlic. And lastly, let's grate our ginger. So you could peel the ginger. A lot of Asian cultures, when they're using ginger like this, where they're adding it to a sauce or cooking it, they actually don't even peel it. You can't really taste it, especially if you're using something like a sharp microplane like this. So it's about a 1-inch piece. Again, I'm kind of eyeballing it. That should be good. And then about 1/4 cup of water. So the water is going to help dilute this a little bit. And last but not least, we're also going to be doing some cornstarch. So typically with sauces like this, you would, and this is just 1 teaspoon of cornstarch. With sauces like this, you would add the cornstarch at the end. Typically, you would make a slurry with a little bit of water, and then you would add it at the end. But we actually want to add it now so that there's some of that cornstarch on the tofu when it goes in the oven. So just making sure that we're mixing this really well. So this is what our sauce looks like. Let me move these guys out of the way. And then with our tofu, you could cut it, or you can just use your fingers and break it apart. And that's what we're gonna do to make it nice and easy. So I like to just take it into chunks, and then we're just gonna make small pieces. And the nice thing about preparing your tofu this way is all of these ridges and crusts and things get nice and crispy in the oven. So you get, you know, another texture piece without having to do much work, right? Because the oven is doing all the work for you. So another nice thing about sheet pans is it's very easy to make a balanced meal when you're doing a sheet pan dinner, because you can put all of the components of a healthy meal onto one sheet, right? So when we're talking about healthy meals, and balanced meals at that, we're looking for a couple of different components. So you want to have some protein, so that can be tofu, your chickpeas, meat, fish, eggs too. For example, if you were to put eggs in fried rice or do like a sunny side up egg on something like this. You want to have some carbs, so that can be something like you make something like this, have some rice on the side, and then the rice is your carb, or something like potato, sweet potato, corn, peas, for example, would work well as well. And then we also want to have some vegetables, some non-starchy vegetables. So those are things like your broccoli and your carrots and your bell peppers, your onions. And then some type of fat source. So whether that's, oil that you're going to be drizzling on top. So I am going to add a little bit of oil onto the vegetables for these guys, or something like a sauce that has some type of oil or fat as well. So with this guy, I am just going to drizzle this on top of the tofu. Again, we're going to be cooking this down a little bit. So there will be more sauce that goes on this as well. Okay. And then I forgot to mention, so this tofu specifically is high protein tofu, which means that it was strained really well to where it's very, very firm. Typically with tofu, even if you get like extra firm tofu, you typically need to strain it and press it so that most of the liquid comes out. With high protein tofu, because it's already pressed and strained, you don't necessarily need to do that. It's just ready to go. All right, so this is going to go in the oven for 15 minutes. Christina, you got that? Okay. I'm also going to mix the oil a little bit into these guys. Okay. And I can see our potatoes are browning a little bit. So let me get a small saucepan. I'll just use this guy. I want to get this on the oven, on the stovetop, just to get things going. And really, it's only a couple of minutes that this needs to heat up and simmer, just to make sure that it thickens a little bit. Okay. So I'm just going to do it on low heat at this point and just keep an eye on it while we work on everything else. So before we get started on our sauces, so I have 2 minutes left on the potatoes. So we're going to add our zucchini to our potatoes so that they cook. And then we're going to leave the zucchini in for 5 minutes before adding our shrimp, right? Because shrimp just takes so little time to cook. We want to make sure that we're not overcooking the shrimp while undercooking the rest of the vegetables, right? So these guys, I'm just going to do a little bit thinner of a slice just to make sure that they cook really well. You could do a little bit thicker and just leave them in until they're nice and tender. Okay. And one of the things that I also really love about dinners like this is you can pack a lot of color into one meal. So those of you that have seen classes done by me before know that I like to talk a lot about fiber and gut health. And one of the reasons why is because we now have a little bit more research suggesting that our gut health impacts a lot of different things. It can influence whether or not you develop diabetes, dementia, cancer, all of these different things. It's related to mental health. So it's really important to take care of our gut and specifically our gut microbiome, which is the population of bacteria that lives in our guts that eat the fiber from the food that we cannot digest. And then in turn, they produce substances that our bodies can actually use for developing health. And one of the main things that gut experts are actually talking about is having a diversity of different fibers that we eat throughout the week. So let me take the potatoes out of the oven. So you can see these guys are getting nice and brown. And I'm actually going to, let me see. Let me find a good utensil for this. This is kind of big, but it will do. So these guys, they're not super brown, but they'll get there. So I'm just going to push them over a little bit just to make room for the zucchini as well. We'll see if that's enough. If not, I'll move them over a little bit more. And then once the zucchini is kind of cooked a little bit, we'll also push it aside even more to make room for the shrimp. I might actually do a little bit more than 5 minutes on the zucchini, just because they are a little bit big. Okay, I'm gonna move this over again. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect, as long as it tastes good, right? Okay, so going back to what I was talking about with fiber, so gut experts are actually, they've done some research recently, and they have actually found that there's kind of like a magic number when it comes to how many plant foods, right, foods that have fiber, that we should eat per week to get the maximum benefits of gut health. So that magic number is 30 to 40 plant foods a week. So let me kind of explain what that means, right? Because that sounds kind of dramatic. So when we're talking about 30 to 40 different plant foods, we are talking about different colors, right? So for example, if you had a red onion, a yellow onion, a green onion that you eat during the week, that would count as 3 different foods, even though they're all onions. Same with like apples. If you had a red apple, a yellow apple, and a green apple in a week, those would count as 3 different ones. So let me kind of explain what is a plant food. So we're talking fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, legumes, herbs and spices as well. So basically anything that comes from a plant is going to be considered a plant food. So what I'm going to do at the end of class is, once everything is all spread out, we're going to actually count how many plant foods we use today to see how easy it actually is to reach that number. Oh, and the other thing I forgot, any nuts and seeds that you use, those also count. Okay, so this is, I turned up the heat a little bit just so I can get it simmering a little bit. Next, we're gonna work on the tahini dressing. Christina, do you need me to move at all? I'm over here. Okay, cool. Okay, and I need my sesame oil. Okay. So the tahini dressing, this is a really fun one. I really like this recipe. It goes with a lot of different things. We're actually, my intention with using this was to pair it with the smoky sweet potato and chickpea dinner, because I feel like those flavors complement each other really well. So we're gonna start with, well, actually I already started with the garlic and then the lemon juice as well. So we're gonna add some tahini. So again, I'm estimating about a 1/4 cup. and I'm making a mess because what would be a cooking demo without a mess? Okay. We're gonna add about 3 tablespoons of water. So let me actually grab a little dish. So the water is to help kind of thin the sauce out, right? The tahini is nice and this one isn't super thick. It's more on the liquidier side. Depending on where you buy your tahini from, it's going to have a different thickness. And I'm just going to mix this. So this is pretty much done. The sauce is already thickened. I don't want it to thicken too much because then it's just going to be goopy instead of saucy, right? So that's done. Again, making a mess. All right, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. One, 2, 1 tablespoon of maple syrup. So the tahini is going to be a little bitter and savory. The lemon juice is going to be acidic. We want some sweetness as well to balance everything out. So that's where the maple syrup comes from. And then some sesame oil. I'm just gonna estimate the 1 teaspoon of sesame oil just because I'm running out of measuring spoons. I already got the garlic, and then we're just gonna do a little sprinkle of salt. And then we're good. And you could also add some pepper to this if you wanted. And then, so we're just gonna mix this until everything is nice and blended. So you'll see that it looks a little bit like it's not coming together, but that's just the tahini just needs to blend with the rest of the ingredients. I think I might have put too much lemon juice in here, so I'm just going to add a little bit more tahini just to achieve the texture that I want. So it's supposed to be thick, but not too thick. Yeah, that might be a little bit too much liquid. Oh, okay. So what I'm going to do off camera once everything is settled is I'm going to adjust all of the other ingredients so that it doesn't just taste like tahini. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to do is we have a minute left on this guy. And then how much on the other one? Okay. Okay. And then let me see on our shrimp. Okay, we have a little bit on our shrimp. Oh, that was the 1 minute, the 1 minute mark. Okay. All right, so last thing we're gonna do is the Greek goddess dip. So this one, I think will work really well with the shrimp dinner, just because we're kind of doing more Mediterranean flavors with the shrimp, with the garlic and the lemon juice. So I think this would work really well. So we're just going to add our Greek yogurt to this. So these 2 small containers are about ½ cup each. So I'm just going to add both of these. These are non-fat plain Greek yogurt. I would recommend using either a whole fat or a full fat or like a 2%. This is the only thing they had at the store today. That's going to give it a little bit of a more creamy feel. Okay. And I'm just going to check on this and make it stop screaming at me. So let's see. So with these guys, I want the sweet potato to be nice and soft. Same thing with the cauliflower, which those all are. Okay. Okay. Now, one of the other things that happens when you're making all of these at once is most of the timers will go off at the same time. So also be prepared for that. Sheet pan dinners, I would say, are good for meal prepping as well. So you can absolutely, if you have the room, to make all of them at once and just prep for the entire week, right? So I'm just gonna let those hang out so that they cool down. And then the zucchini, that is the other thing that was yelling. So I'm just gonna pierce these guys. Okay, I'm gonna leave them in for a little bit longer just to make sure that they have enough time to soften. So let's do 5 minutes. Okay. All right, so I got my yogurt in here. And then I have my big bowl of herbs. So with my herbs, I actually feel like for recipes like these, where you're just like ripping off, putting it in the food processor is doing the work. I like to wash them and kind of leave them bundled because then you can just easily rip off the leaves. So we're gonna estimate about, a 1/4 cup of each of these herbs. So this is cilantro. I also have a little bit of basil. So we're doing a 1/4 cup of these guys. They are a little bit bruised, and that's because I washed them before class. Okay. We're gonna do some dill as well. And actually, some of these herbs we're actually going to use to top some of the veggies as well to get that freshness. So that's our dill. And for all of these, you don't want to use the stems just because they are a little tough. Sometimes the food processor doesn't break them down as much as it should. So it might be a weird texture with a sauce like this. And then parsley as well. So I chose Italian parsley or flat leaf parsley. This is, it's not as tough of a texture as, for example, a curly parsley would be. I feel like with a sauce like this, where it's a little more delicate, it's better to use more delicate herbs. And then we have some garlic. You could chop this a little bit beforehand, but I like to make the food processor do all the work instead of myself. Oh, okay. Okay, hold on. Lemon juice, salt and pepper. Before I forget where I'm at with this. So for the salt and pepper, again, I'm kind of eyeballing. Okay. All right. And then let me check on the tofu with the broccoli and the bell peppers. So again, I'm just checking to see these guys are tender. So the broccoli, not quite. The tofu is getting nice and brown. So I'm gonna leave it in for a couple more minutes as well, just to cook. Again, depending on what your oven reacts like at home, the cooking times might be a little bit different. Basically, if you can pierce everything pretty easily with a fork, it's done. Right? Okay, next, we're gonna turn this on. So I'm sorry if it's loud. And because we put the whole garlic cloves in here, I just want to make sure that this is blended really well so that nobody has a very dramatic garlic surprise when, you guys eat this. But I'm not sure if you can smell all the herbs. It smells very herby over here. It has a very beautiful color as well. Okay, sauce is done. That was pretty easy. Yeah? Okay. I'm just gonna leave it in here for a little bit. I'll transfer it to a bowl as well. And then I got a couple more minutes on, a couple more seconds. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to my tahini dressing and add some more things to hopefully save it. Yes. All right, that looks like about the texture I was aiming for. I am going to taste this just to make sure that it tastes good. All right. Okay, that's good. Wonderful. So this is ready. I'm just going to leave it over here. So next we're going to add our shrimp. We're just going to move everything. Okay, that's nice and cool. Everything over. Where's this? Okay, so our zucchini, yeah, it's starting to get nice and tender. So I'm just going to move everything over just to make some room for the shrimp. Christina, am I good in terms of the camera? Okay, so I'm actually gonna just spoon the shrimp, trying not to get too much of the sauce onto the pan because I want to save that sauce to drizzle over everything else, like the veggies. And the shrimp, you don't necessarily have to do a single layer, right? Shrimp is pretty easy to cook. I estimate that it's likely only going to be about 7-ish minutes for the shrimp to be done. And then I'm just going to spoon the rest of this sauce over our zucchini, our potatoes. So I would, for the tofu, I would actually put the tofu in at the same time as the zucchini. So you would have, let's see. So about like 5 minutes for the zucchini and then another 5-7 minutes. So I would say anywhere from like 10 to 15 minutes for both the tofu and the zucchini at that point. So with the chicken, it depends on how big the pieces are. So with chicken, I would check with a food thermometer, make sure it's at, I believe it's 165 is the number for chicken. Please Google that. Don't take my word for it. I don't remember all of the temperatures off the top of my head. The smaller the pieces of chicken, the quicker it's going to bake, right? Okay. So it's okay if these guys overlap a little bit. I would rather move the zucchini a little bit more. And then we're gonna leave this in until pretty much the end of class. It is 165, okay, I was right. Okay. So basically we're looking for the shrimp to turn nice and pink. So that's where we're at with that. Okay, I'm just gonna add this guy back in. Okay, and I'm gonna check our broccoli again. So the broccoli is a little tough still. I'm gonna leave it. It is browning nicely, so that's good. So we're just gonna leave it a little bit more. So we have our tahini. The last thing we need to do is cut up some herbs for our toppings. So for the sweet potatoes and the chickpeas, we're gonna do some parsley. I'm just gonna do not a super fine chop. using any other ones specifically. So we're gonna do the parsley. Again, get some of that freshness, and then the cilantro. So those are the herbs that were recommended by the recipe. Okay. So I'm just gonna do basically a generous sprinkle over these guys. Same with these guys. Well, actually, I think I'm actually going to toss all of these together so that it's easier for everybody to just pick up. And then the cilantro, same thing. I'm just going to do it over this sheet pan, and then we'll mix everything together. So like I was saying at the beginning of class, this is a really good way to cut down on dishes, because if you put the parchment paper so that it's a little bit bigger than the sheet pan, you can just take it like so. And then all you have to do is just rinse that sheet pan, and then you're done. That's it. And you can just throw this away. Doesn't that look beautiful with all those colors? Okay, I'm just gonna take actually this, just give it a nice little toss so that everybody gets a little bit of everything. And again, these are just suggestions in terms of what vegetables and what proteins you can use, and also the seasonings. You know, if you wanted to make something smoky, you could substitute for pretty much anything, right? Just use some type of smoked spice, or if you can find like a smoked herb, that would be great too. Okay. So we have this guy ready to go with our sauce to pair. And then I also want to slice up a little bit of more of this cilantro, as much as I can get, so that we can top the cashew tofu. I think that would be, actually, I'm going to save this, a good option for that. And also we're going to do a little bit of basil, right? Because basil is used in Asian cuisine quite frequently. This one, I believe, is Italian-ish basil or Genovese basil. You could absolutely use a Thai basil just to be kind of in the same theme as well. So with these guys, I'm just going to do a rough chop again. So this is more so just for flavor, color, freshness, and also to add to that 30 to 40 plant foods that you're eating per week. So you could just leave it out. Actually, you could do like tarragon if you wanted to. You could not put anything in place of it, and then just do a little bit more of the other herbs to kind of get that texture piece. But you don't necessarily need to use any herbs that you do not like. I actually saw a video recently about somebody talking about how herbs are very personal. We all have our own preferences when it comes to herbs. So just use whatever herbs you like.
So if you use tarragon, that's really strong.
If you use tarragon, that is really strong, yes. So you would want to use a small amount, yes, just to make sure. And also, you know, taste it, see if you need to add more, right? It's all about taste and matching your own preferences really when it comes to cooking. Yeah. And then with the rest of this dill, I'm actually going to add the dill and the rest of the parsley to the shrimp when those are done, because I feel like dill works really well with the garlic and the lemon. And we also have dill in the Greek goddess dip, which pairs really well with the shrimp. And we have a little bit of parsley. Again, I really like to just keep the bundles as much as I can, just because it makes it a little bit easier to just chop things off of it. Again, it doesn't even have to be a whole lot of herbs, just enough to give you some color and a little bit of taste as well. I'm just going to mix them a little bit together so it's easier to just sprinkle on top once they are done. Okay, any other questions from back home? No? Okay. So let me take these guys out of the oven so that we can, okay, the shrimp are nice and pink. I'm gonna leave them a little bit longer. These guys are pretty much done. So what I'm gonna do, you can see the tofu is getting nice and brown on the edges there, a little bit crispy. This guy can go bye-bye. And then I'm just going to add the sauce to the rest of the veggies, the rest of the tofu, and we're just going to toss it so that everything is coated in that sauce. Again, if you feel like this isn't enough sauce, you could absolutely double the recipe as well if you wanted something that's a little saucier. And then I'm just going to give this a nice toss. And then we're going to add the herbs on top as well. And this is one of those dishes that I would absolutely pair with some rice. I just forgot to grab rice today. I was going to make some and I completely forgot about it. So my apologies. Or you could even do quinoa or a different grain as well. That would work. Or you could even do sweet potatoes if you wanted to. Okay. So we're going to do the basil and the cilantro. You could also do some, sprinkle some sesame seeds on top of this as well. That would work really well, give it a nice texture. And then I'm just gonna put this guy over here. Okay, and last thing. I'm gonna turn off the oven so that it's not as hot in here. The shrimp are nice and done. They're nice and pink. I don't even think I forgot to put a timer on, so that's okay too. And then I do want to test just the zucchini. Yes, they're nice and soft. Same thing with our potatoes. So this is still a little liquidy. Again, with the shrimp, with the tails being off, they were pretty small too. I feel like they're also leaving a lot of this liquid behind. If you were using bigger shrimp, it's possible that there wouldn't be this much liquid. It could also be from the zucchini as well. And then I'm just going to add these herbs on top. Ooh, making a mess as always, but that's okay. And the last thing I'm going to do is put the green goddess dip in a bowl. And then you guys can come up and sample. Any last minute questions or comments? Oh, the last thing we have to do is count how many plant foods. So I'm actually going to look at the recipes because I feel like it would be a little bit too hard to look at everything and kind of remember what all the spices and all the things we added were. So here's that green goddess dip. Isn't that beautiful? What a pretty color. Okay, so let's look at our recipes real quick. So we got our cilantro, basil, dill, parsley, garlic, lemon juice. Over here, tahini counts as a plant. Lemon juice, again, we're not going to count it. Olive oil, technically an oil, we're not going to count it. Garlic clove, we already counted. We have chickpeas, sweet potatoes, cauliflower, red onion, smoked paprika, fennel seeds, dry thyme, basil, ground cumin. I'm not going to count the garlic powder. I am going to count the pepper though. We already have parsley, cilantro. Let's see. Potatoes, zucchini. The tofu we count because it comes from a bean. So that's 20 already. Broccoli, bell peppers. We already counted onion, cashews. And let's see, anything else? Ginger, green onion. So 26 just across these 5 recipes. So you can see how it can be relatively easy to reach the 30 to 40 plant foods a week. And that is all I have for you. I hope for those of you at home that you try these recipes. I hope you enjoy them, and let's eat. Thank you so much for coming.